I made the coffee that sent men to the moon. Not the rocket, not the fuel, not the computers, the guidance system, the heat shield, the radio signals, or the thousands of calculations that had to work perfectly for 3 men to travel 240,000 miles from home and return alive. I made the coffee that the people responsible for those things drank while they worked. And if you think that does not count, then you have never seen an engineer at 4 in the morning. You have never watched a physicist stare at the same column of numbers for 20 minutes because his eyes were open, but his mind had already fallen asleep. You have never stood inside a building where one misplaced decimal point could become a funeral. I have. For 7 years, I watched the people who were sending men to the moon. I watched them when the tests succeeded. I watched them when the rockets exploded. I watched them when they were confident enough to speak to reporters and frightened enough to whisper prayers over paper cups. I watched what happened when the coffee was late. The coffee was never late, because I was never late. My name is Dorothy Mae Wilson on July 20th, 1969. I was 43 years old, the wife of a postal worker, the mother of 2 children, and the cafeteria supervisor in Building 3 of the manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas. Before that day ended, a 19-year-old cafeteria worker would leave his apron on my counter and walk toward mission control. My 17-year-old son would make a decision that changed the direction of his life. And a man whose name I never learned would speak one ordinary word across my counter, and for the first time, that word would include me. But at 4:30 that morning, none of that had happened yet. The city was asleep. The astronauts were still circling the moon, and my alarm was ringing. I opened my eyes before the second bell. James was sleeping beside me. My husband could sleep through rain, thunder, barking dogs, and the number 26 bus grinding its gears at the corner. But the moment I moved, he opened one eye. "You going to the moon today?" he asked. His voice was thick with sleep. "I am making coffee." "So yes," I smiled in the dark. "Go back to sleep." "I have to be at the post office in 2 hours." "Then sleep for 2 hours." He closed his eye again. James had worked for the Postal Service for 18 years. He carried other people's words through Houston heat and Gulf Coast rain. Birthday cards, bills, love letters, government notices, letters from sons in Vietnam, letters from mothers asking those sons when they were coming home. James said the mail was proof that human beings could not bear to remain separate. I said coffee proved the same thing. He said that made no sense. I said most important truths made no sense before sunrise. I dressed quietly and walked into the kitchen. Our house stood on Dowling Street in 3rd Ward, Houston. It was a small house with a narrow porch, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen that seemed to become smaller every year the children became larger. The stove leaned slightly to the left. The refrigerator hummed louder whenever it was considering another breakdown. The table had 4 chairs, although one had been repaired so many times that sitting on it required faith. Above the sink was a window overlooking the street. I filled the pot and made my own coffee. That was always the first cup of the day. The woman who made coffee for the people sending men to the moon needed coffee herself. That was not hypocrisy. That was engineering. The Houston heat pressed against the glass. The sun had not risen, but the heat had never left. It had waded through the night, wet and heavy, turning the air into something you wore instead of breathed. I stood at the sink and looked outside. The moon was visible above the rooftops. Pale, distant, ordinary, that was the strange part. While 3 men moved around it and millions of people prepared to watch 2 of them attempt to land, the moon looked exactly as it always had. It did not look dangerous. It did not look historical. It did not look as though billions of dollars, thousands of careers, and 3 human lives were depending on what happened above its surface. It looked like the moon, above the Baptist church, above the oak trees, above the power lines, above 3rd Ward. I drank and thought about Calvin. My son was 17. He had been talking about the mission for weeks while pretending not to care too much. 17-year-old boys believe enthusiasm can be used against them. He had memorized the names of the astronauts: Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, Michael Collins. He knew the shape of the lunar module and the order of the mission stages. He understood more of the television explanations than I did, although he sometimes hid that knowledge when his father entered the room. James believed a boy should be proud of knowing things. Calvin believed a boy should pretend not to be proud of anything. Our daughter Diane was 14. She cared less about the spacecraft and more about whether the television stations would interrupt her programs. She had examined one of Calvin's Apollo diagrams and asked why the government could build a machine capable of reaching the moon, but could not build a television that showed a clear picture. "That is a good question," I told her. Third Ward had many good questions about the moon. People asked me those questions because I worked at the Space Center. They asked at church, at the grocery store, at the bus stop, at Mr. Johnson's barbershop, where men debated politics as though the president had called personally and requested their advice. "Dorothy," they said, "why do you make coffee for those people?" Those people. Sometimes that meant engineers. Sometimes it meant white people. Sometimes it meant the federal government. Usually it meant all three. Mrs. Carter, who lived 3 houses from us, had asked the most direct question. "They are spending billions of dollars to put white men on the moon," she said, "and the school on Live Oak Street does not have enough science books. Explain that to me." I could not. She was right. Mr. Johnson said the government could calculate the exact position of a spacecraft above the moon, but somehow could not locate the pothole outside his barbershop. He was right, too. The country always found money when power decided something mattered. Rockets mattered. Bombs mattered. Third Ward was still waiting to matter. I understood the anger. I carried it with me every morning. But I went to work anyway. Not because I believed the space program was more important than our schools. Not because I believed the people at the center deserved more than the children on Dowling Street. I went because I believed the moon belonged to those children too. The question did not belong only to governments, generals, and engineers. Can we go there? Human beings had asked that question before there was a Houston, before there was an America, before anyone knew the moon was a world rather than a light placed in the sky by God. Every child had looked upward. Every child had wondered. The question belonged to everyone. The answer should too. I rinsed my cup, packed my lunch, and stepped outside. The street was quiet. A porch light burned at the Robinson house. Somewhere a radio played softly behind an open window. My white cafeteria uniform looked almost blue beneath the streetlights. I walked toward the bus stop carrying my purse in one hand and my lunch in the other. At 5:15, the number 26 arrived. The driver opened the door. "Morning, Miss Dorothy." "Morning, Henry." "Big day. So people keep telling me." The bus was half empty. At that hour, the passengers were not the people whose photographs would appear in newspapers. They were the people who entered important buildings before the important people arrived. Cleaning women, maintenance men, security guards, cafeteria workers, a groundskeeper sleeping with his cap pulled over his eyes, a woman named Evelyn who cleaned offices at the center and could identify every senior engineer by the trash he left behind. "Dr. Reynolds is worried," she had told me the previous week. "How do you know?" 3 broken pencils in his wastebasket. She was right. The invisible workforce noticed things. That was our advantage. People behaved honestly around those they did not see. An engineer might smile in a meeting and then tear a paper cup in half when he returned to his office. A manager might tell reporters the mission was proceeding perfectly and leave 6 antacid wrappers beside his telephone. A scientist might speak confidently in public and whisper a prayer when he thought the janitor had gone. We saw them. They did not always see us. Invisible was not necessarily an insult. Not exactly. A foundation is invisible. You do not photograph it. You do not interview it. You do not place the foundation on the cover of Life magazine. But the building does not stand without it. The bus left Third Ward. The moon followed us between buildings. We passed closed stores, empty intersections, and houses where families were still sleeping. The city changed gradually. The roads widened. The buildings moved farther apart. The houses became newer. The lawns became larger. By the time we approached Clear Lake, 3rd Ward felt farther away than 12 miles. The Space Center parking lot was already full. At 6 in the morning, cars occupied nearly every space. Some had been there all night. The engineers had stopped going home 3 days earlier. Apollo 11 was in lunar orbit. Armstrong and Aldrin were preparing to descend. Michael Collins would remain alone in the command module, circling above them, waiting to discover whether his friends would return. I entered Building 3. The hallway lights were painfully bright. Fluorescent lights always made the center look as though it had been designed by people suspicious of shadows. The building was awake. Telephones rang. Shoes hurried across polished floors. Men in white shirts carried folders beneath their arms. Secretaries walked faster than the men and somehow managed not to spill their tea. The air itself felt charged. Not excitement exactly. Excitement is light. This was heavier. Expectation mixed with fear. 7 years of work had narrowed into 1 day. There were no more months to prepare. No more years to improve the design. No future mission to hide behind. The mission was happening. Today. As I approached the cafeteria, I saw Tommy standing near a junction in the hallway. A security guard was speaking to him. Tommy was 19 years old, tall and thin, with a cafeteria uniform 1 size too large and an engineering textbook protruding from his back pocket. The guard pointed toward the service corridor. "Cafeteria entrance is that way." "I know," Tommy said. "Then why are you standing here?" "I was looking at the mission control sign." "You planning to control a mission?" The guard smiled, not cruelly. That almost made it worse. Tommy looked down. "No, sir." "Then keep the hallway clear." Tommy turned toward the cafeteria. The guard had already forgotten him. I had not. "Morning, Tommy," I said. "Morning, Mrs. Wilson." "You get lost." "No. What were you looking at?" "Nothing." The engineering book remained visible in his pocket. "Nothing must be interesting." He smiled without lifting his eyes. I unlocked the cafeteria. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and yesterday's toast. I switched on the lights. The long counter appeared. The tables, the register, the grill, the dessert case, and the coffee urns. I filled them with water, measured the grounds by hand. The manual recommended 1.5 scoops per gallon. I used 2, always 2. The manual had been written by someone who had never encountered an engineer during a crisis. Louise arrived first. She handled the grill and had the arms of a woman who had lifted cast iron skillets her entire life. "Morning," she said. "Morning. Anybody dead yet?" "Not today." "Then we are ahead." Bernard came next. He nodded, tied his apron, and walked directly to the dish station. Bernard wasted no words before sunrise. Maria opened the register and counted the money twice. Tommy tied his apron and placed his engineering textbook beneath the counter. He believed I did not know he studied during quiet moments. I knew. I knew when he borrowed pencils from the office. I knew when he equations onto napkins. I knew he listened whenever engineers discussed the mission while waiting for their food. Fuel margins. Descent rates, radar data, words that sounded foreign now but might one day become his language. Tommy wanted to stand on the other side of the counter. I wanted that for him. At 6:45, the first engineer entered. Bob, black coffee, no sugar, no cream, 2 cups before 8 o'clock. I knew hundreds of orders. Knowledge lived in my hands before it reached my mind. Bob approached the counter. "Morning, Dorothy." "Morning, Bob." I filled his cup. His hand shook when he reached for it. "Big day," I said. He smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. "The biggest." Bob had worked on the guidance systems for years. I did not know precisely which part. He once tried to explain it using a spoon and a dinner roll. The dinner roll was the moon. The spoon was the spacecraft. There was something important that I have since forgotten. By the time he finished, the dinner roll had fallen onto the floor. I told him I hoped his real calculations were better. He did not laugh. Engineers rarely laughed about calculations. Bob carried the coffee to his usual table. He wrapped both hands around the cup. The room was warm. Houston was already warm, but Bob looked cold. There is a cold that has nothing to do with temperature. It comes when every test has been completed and every calculation has been checked, yet the outcome remains beyond your control. The universe does not care how hard you worked. The moon does not care how many nights you slept beneath your desk. Gravity does not accept apologies. Bob lifted the cup. The shaking slowed. Then the doors opened again. The first wave entered. Engineers. Technicians, secretaries, managers, men with rolled-up sleeves, women carrying folders. People whose eyes were red from too little sleep. They came toward the counter, and I began to pour, cup after cup, hand after hand, person after person. Every person carried one small piece of the mission, and somewhere above the moon, 3 men were about to discover whether those pieces fit together. By 9 o'clock, the cafeteria had become a country, not a room. A country. The tables were territories. Engineers sat near the windows, spreading papers around their trays. Flight controllers gathered near the television, although there was nothing yet to see except Walter Cronkite speaking from a studio. Secretaries occupied 2 tables close to the wall, where they could drink tea without someone handing them a document between bites. Technicians stood because sitting felt too comfortable. Managers moved from group to group, speaking quietly and leaving before anyone could ask a question they did not want to answer. The conversations blended into one continuous murmur, a building-wide hum. 7 years of work had narrowed into hours, and nobody knew what to do with his hands while waiting. So they held coffee. By 10:30, I had refilled both urns 3 times. Louise cooked eggs faster than plates could carry them away. Bernard washed dishes before they had time to cool. Maria stopped saying the total aloud because the line had grown too long. Tommy moved between the kitchen and the counter, but his attention remained elsewhere. Every time the cafeteria doors opened, he looked toward the hallway. "You expecting someone?" I asked. "No, ma'am. You keep looking at that door." He glanced at the engineering book beneath the counter. "I was wondering how close they let employees get to mission control." "Employees with badges?" "Yes, you have a badge. A cafeteria badge. It opens the cafeteria." He smiled weakly. "That is the problem." The counter divided his world. On our side were coffee urns, plates, aprons, and work people noticed only when it was not done. On the other side were equations, consoles, headsets, and rooms where history arrived through speakers. Tommy understood the distance. So did I. When I first began working at the center in 1962, I had entered through the service door. A supervisor named Mr. Henley showed me the cafeteria, the storage room, the employee entrance, and the corridors used by service staff. He explained where I was allowed to go. He did not need to explain where I was not allowed to go. The building explained it. Certain doors had signs. Certain corridors became quiet when workers like me approached. Certain men looked through you as though acknowledging a cafeteria employee might interrupt an important thought. But some people learned my name. Bob did. Dr. Sullivan did. The secretaries did. After enough mornings, coffee creates relationships that rules do not anticipate. A man reveals more while waiting for coffee than he does during a meeting. I learned who was divorcing, who had a child in the hospital, who had been passed over for promotion, who feared the mission would fail, who feared it would succeed and leave him without a purpose afterward. Success frightened them differently. For 7 years, Apollo had given shape to their lives. Every morning had a destination. Every argument mattered. Every missed dinner could be justified by the moon. But after the landing, what would remain? Some people fear failure. Others fear the empty room after success. Near 10:45, an engineer dropped several pages beside the condiment table. Tommy reached them first. The pages were covered with diagrams and handwritten calculations. He lifted them carefully. "Sir," the engineer turned. "You dropped these." "Thank you." Tommy looked at the top page. "Is this the descent radar?" The engineer paused. "What?" "The diagram. It looks like the radar system for the lunar module." The engineer took the pages from his hand. "It will not mean much to you, son." The words were spoken casually, without anger, without the intention to wound. The engineer returned to his table. Tommy remained beside the condiment station. The most efficient barriers are the ones built by people who do not realize they are building them. I called him. Tommy. He returned to the counter. What did you see? Nothing. You recognized the diagram? I thought I did. Did you? Yes. Then it was not nothing. He began stacking cups. The man said it would not mean much to me. The man does not know you. He knows the diagram. That is not what I said. Tommy looked toward the table. The engineer was already absorbed in his papers. He did not mean anything by it, Tommy said. I know. That was the problem. Bob returned for his third cup. He had never taken 3 cups before 11. You planning to sleep this week? I asked. Maybe in August. Your hand is shaking again. Coffee. You were shaking before the coffee. He looked toward the television. They changed the landing approach. What does that mean? It means Armstrong may have to fly farther than planned. Is that dangerous? He looked at me. Engineers do not like answering simple questions about dangerous things. They prefer percentages, probabilities, margins, words that place distance between the mouth and fear. It means the fuel matters more, he said. Did the fuel not matter before? It mattered before. Then what changed? The amount they may need. He lifted the cup. That does not sound comforting. It is not. He walked away. Tommy had stopped stacking cups. He had heard every word. The landing approach changed, he asked. That is what Bob says. Because of the terrain, you know more than I do. The planned area might have rocks or craters. I looked at him. Would the diagram mean much to you? He almost smiled. At Bob's table, Dr. Sullivan had covered a napkin with numbers. Dr. Sullivan was 60 years old, with white hair, a bad knee, and a slide rule carried in his shirt pocket as though it were a weapon. He calculated on anything: reports, menus, receipts. Once he calculated the rate at which Louise's pancakes were becoming smaller during a busy morning. Louise told him to calculate the distance between his table and the door. That day he moved the slide rule slowly, wrote a number, crossed it out, wrote another. He stared for a long time. Then he closed his eyes and exhaled. I could not understand the calculation. I understood the exhale. The number had held. At another table sat the secretaries. Nobody wrote stories about the secretaries. Nobody photographed the women who typed flight plans, corrected spelling in technical reports, arranged meetings, answered telephones, managed travel schedules, and found documents engineers had placed somewhere safe. The secretaries drank tea. I noticed because noticing what people drank was my profession. The engineers drank coffee. The managers drank coffee with too much cream. The technicians drank whatever was closest. The secretaries drank tea. Tea was the calm drink. The women themselves were calm. They had managed chaos for years. They understood that panic only created additional paperwork. One of them, Mrs. Talbot, approached the counter near 11. Tea, I asked. Make it coffee. I looked at her. Are things that bad? Worse, I poured. What happened? Nothing yet. Then why worse? Because nothing happening is all we can do now. She took the cup. Years of typing reports, Dorothy. Thousands of pages. Every possible failure. Every possible response. Now they are flying the thing and there is nothing left to type. She glanced toward the hallway. I almost wish someone would dictate a memo. She returned to her table. At 11:30, I filled the urns for the 5th time. 5 fillings before noon. An ordinary day required 3, a busy day 4, that day 5. The coffee had stopped being a stimulant. It had become a ritual. They drank it the way the faithful light candles, not because one more cup could change the spacecraft, because the act gave their hands something to do. I watched from behind the counter. Watching was my real work that afternoon. My story was not the mission as the engineers understood it. My story was the people. The way fear and pride occupied the same face. The way confidence sounded different when spoken to reporters and whispered over breakfast. The way men who understood the mathematics of space still touched crosses around their necks. The way women excluded from important rooms knew everything happening inside them. The way a building could contain thousands of people and still hold only one thought: please let them land. At noon, The pay phone near the register rang. Maria answered and called my name. "Dorothy, your husband." I wiped my hands and lifted the receiver. Behind James, I could hear the post office sorting machines, metallic clattering, carts rolling, voices calling routes, the sound of millions of letters being separated and sent toward people who were waiting. "Are you watching?" he asked. "We are watching. Calvin is at the Robinson house." "Why, they have a color television." "Is the moon less gray in color?" James laughed. "He says it is still gray." "Government spent all that money and could not add color." "That is what Diane said." I smiled. The cafeteria television showed Walter Cronkite beside a model of the spacecraft. "I wish you could see this building," I told James. "What is it like?" "Church before the preacher tells you whether God answered." "That quiet, quieter. Are the Rocket boys scared? Terrified? Good, good, means they understand what they are doing." He paused. "Dorothy." "Yes, tell them their coffee lady is proud of them." I laughed. "I am serious." "I know. Tell them Dorothy Mae Wilson from 3rd Ward, Houston, Texas is proud." "I will." "And Dorothy?" "Yes, I am proud of you too." The pay phone clicked. A dime purchased only so much conversation. James was gone, but the word remained. Proud. It stayed in the receiver, in my hand, in the space between the counter and the television. History would remember the men inside Mission Control. It would remember the astronauts. It might remember Walter Cronkite removing his glasses. It would not remember a postal worker calling his wife from a pay phone. But I would, proud, the quiet word, the word that warmed more reliably than coffee. When I returned to the urns, Tommy stood nearby. He had heard enough to understand. "Your husband sounds nice," he said. "He has his moments." Tommy glanced toward the hallway. "Mrs. Wilson?" "Yes, I wanted to ask you something. You have been wanting to ask since you arrived." He swallowed. "The landing is supposed to happen after 3. That is what they say. There is a viewing area near Mission Control, so I have heard. Employees can stand outside if they have badges. You have a badge." He touched the card clipped to his uniform. "It says cafeteria. It also says employee." The guard this morning did not seem impressed. I looked at him. "You still want to go?" "Yes." "Why?" He glanced toward the table where the engineer had dismissed him. "I need to see the room. We have a television here. It is not the same. Same landing, not the same room." He struggled for the words. "I want to see the people when it happens. I want to hear the way they talk. I want to know whether they look different when they are doing it." "Doing what?" "The thing everyone says people like me do not do." There it was. Not anger, not self-pity. A request for evidence. Tommy did not want only to see men reach the moon. He wanted proof that the room from which they were guided was an actual room. A room with doors. A room human beings entered. Not a distant kingdom inhabited by another kind of person. "My shift ends at 2, he continued. "But if I wait until 2, the hallway will already be full. I wanted to take my break early." "At noon." "Yes, you want to leave the cafeteria during the busiest day we have ever had." His face fell. When a person is young, disappointment enters the face before pride can stop it. "I understand," he said. "Do you?" "Yes, ma'am. No, you do not." He looked up. "Go," I said. He stared at me. "What?" "Go, but my station, I will cover it." "Mrs. Wilson, you are already covering. I have 2 hands. The line has survived worse." He looked toward Louise. Louise had been listening. "I will handle the sandwiches," she said. Bernard spoke from the sink. "I can clear trays." Maria pointed at him. "If the register is short, I am blaming the moon." Tommy remained still. "Go before I change my mind," I told him. He began to turn. "And Tommy." "Yes, take off that apron before you walk toward Mission Control." He looked down. "Why?" "Because you are not going there to serve them lunch." He grinned. The grin of a 19-year-old who had just been given permission to leave the kitchen and enter the cathedral. He untied the apron, folded it carefully. Tommy was always careful. Neatness, he once told me, was the visible form of precision. Precision kept rockets on course. He placed the apron on the counter. The engineering book remained in his back pocket. Then he walked away. I watched him cross the cafeteria. past the tables occupied by engineers, past the man who had told him the diagram would mean nothing, through the doors, into the hallway, toward mission control. That was the proudest moment of my day. Not the flag, not the footprint, not the famous words that would come later. The boy leaving the counter, the boy crossing to the other side. That was my moon landing. Then someone increased the television volume. Walter Cronkite announced that the lunar module had separated from the command module. Armstrong and Aldrin were beginning their descent. The cafeteria went quiet. The coffee continued dripping into the urn. Nobody moved to fill a cup. The waiting was over. The falling had begun. The television was small, black and white, mounted above the dessert station on a shelf never designed to carry the attention of an entire room. On ordinary days, it showed the noon news. Vietnam, protests, funerals, cities burning. America had spent the decade tearing itself apart while simultaneously reaching toward the stars. That afternoon, every face in the cafeteria turned toward the screen. Walter Cronkite spoke slowly. The lunar module was descending. There was no clear image of the spacecraft, no sweeping view of the moon, no music, only voices moving through static, numbers, distances, technical phrases spoken by men trained to sound calm while danger entered the room. Louise turned off the grill. Bernard placed a wet plate beside the sink. Maria stopped counting change. I set down the coffee pot. People on the other side of the counter stopped eating. Forks remained suspended above trays. Cups cooled between hands. Even the secretaries forgot their tea. We listened. The lunar module was called Eagle. It was an awkward-looking machine. 4 thin legs, a body wrapped in gold-colored foil. A cabin barely large enough for 2 men. It did not resemble the ships in science fiction movies. It resembled something built in a garage by a brilliant person who had never been asked to make it beautiful. Beauty was not the requirement. Survival was. Armstrong and Aldrin were descending toward an area called the Sea of Tranquility. The name sounded peaceful. Names often lie. Someone near the television repeated the altitude, 40,000 feet, then lower. The engineers watched differently from the rest of us. I watched the television. They watched one another. Each movement in the room became information. A chair scraping, a man leaning forward, a hand covering a mouth. Bob did not blink. Doctor. Sullivan touched the slide rule in his pocket without removing it. Mrs. Talbot held her coffee in both hands. As Eagle fell, the guidance computer sounded an alarm. A number appeared in the transmission. 1202. The engineers reacted before Walter Cronkite explained. Heads lifted. Chairs moved. Bob stood. "What does that mean?" someone asked. No answer came. The commentators spoke over one another. A voice from Mission Control approved the continuation. The descent continued. I looked at Bob. His face had lost its color. "Bob," he did not hear me. "Bob, what is 1202? He turned. "Computer overload." "What does that mean?" "It is receiving more tasks than it can process." "Can it still land?" "They say yes." "Do you say yes?" Bob looked back at the television. "I say they had better be right." The alarm sounded again. 1202. Then another. 1201. Each number entered the room like a knock on a door nobody wanted to open. The computer was overloaded. The spacecraft continued descending. The approval from Mission Control came quickly. Continue. 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 That word was either courage or disaster. We would not know which until afterward. The television commentators explained that the computer was discarding less important tasks to concentrate on the landing. "That sounds intelligent," Louise whispered. "More intelligent than some people I know." Nobody laughed. The altitude continued falling. Armstrong looked through the window and saw that the automatic guidance system was carrying Eagle toward a field of rocks. He took manual control. Cronkite explained it. Bob whispered before the television did. "He is flying long." "What does that mean?" I asked. "He is passing the planned landing site." "Why? Rocks. Can he do that?" "He is doing it." "What happens to the fuel?" Bob did not answer. The room understood anyway. Eagle moved across the lunar surface searching for a safe place to land. Every second consumed fuel meant for descent. The fuel intended for returning to orbit was separate, someone explained, but that did not help two men who had not yet reached the ground. The planned landing site disappeared behind them. Armstrong continued forward. The men inside Mission Control could see the numbers. They could see the fuel remaining. They could not see what Armstrong saw through the window. They had to trust him. Trust is a strange thing in engineering. Engineers build their lives around eliminating uncertainty. But at the final moment, someone still has to make a decision no formula can make for him. Mission Control began calling the remaining time. 90 seconds. The cafeteria compressed around the television. Nobody breathed normally. In Mission Control, men stared at consoles. In the cafeteria, people stared at a television showing men staring at consoles. On the moon, Armstrong searched for a place without boulders. The distance between all of us felt both enormous and non-existent. 240,000 miles. And one room. 60 seconds. Someone near the back whispered a prayer. Maria crossed herself. The voice from Mission Control remained controlled. That control frightened me more than shouting would have. People shout when there is still something ordinary to do. Calm arrives when every movement must be exact. I looked at the hallway doors. No Tommy. I wondered whether he had found a place near Mission Control. I wondered whether the guard had seen the cafeteria badge and turned him around again. I wondered whether he was standing somewhere alone, listening through a closed door. 30 seconds. Bob gripped the back of a chair. His knuckles turned white. Dr. Sullivan stood beside him with the slide rule still in his pocket. The secretaries held hands beneath their table. Louise's spatula rested on the grill. Bernard's plate remained in the sink. Coffee dripped from the machine. One drop at a time. 20 seconds. I thought of the moon above my kitchen window, pale over Third Ward. I thought of Calvin watching at the Robinson house, of James beside a radio at the post office, of Diane pretending not to care, of children sitting in classrooms without enough science books while two men descended toward another world. 10 seconds, then a voice came through the television. Contact light. The words were not dramatic. They did not sound large enough. A pause followed, the longest pause I have ever lived through. Then Armstrong spoke. Houston, Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed. The clock above the dessert station read 3:17. Houston time, cafeteria time. For one instant, nobody moved. The words had traveled from the moon, through space, into Mission Control, through the television, and into our room. Perhaps the human mind needs a moment to accept the impossible. Then the room broke, not into pieces, into joy. The sound did not begin as a cheer. It began as an exhale. A room full of people releasing a breath they had been holding for 7 years. It came from deeper than the throat, fear leaving the body, fear becoming air, fear becoming noise. Then the cheering came. Tables shook. Chairs scraped across the floor. Someone knocked over a cup. Bob covered his face with both hands. He began to weep. Not careful tears, not the crying of a man trying to preserve dignity. He wept like someone who had been strong for too long and had finally received permission to stop. An engineer beside him placed an arm around his shoulders. Another joined them. Dr. Sullivan jumped, actually jumped. A 60-year-old man with a bad knee and a slide rule in his pocket lifted both feet from the floor. When he landed, the bad knee failed him. He winced. The wince became laughter. Maria crossed herself while laughing. Bernard placed both hands on the edge of the sink and lowered his head. His shoulders moved. Bernard was crying. He had washed dishes in that cafeteria for 11 years. He never discussed the mission. I had assumed he did not care. Bernard cared. Everyone cared. Louise stood at the grill. She held the spatula in one hand and covered her mouth with the other. Her eyes were wide and wet. I walked around the counter. For 7 years, the counter had been the boundary between where I worked and where they worked. At 3:17, I crossed it and held Louise. She held me back. We laughed and cried at the same time. The emotion did not know which form to choose. Joy, relief, pride, disbelief, All of it arrived together. Behind us, engineers embraced secretaries. Technicians embraced managers. A man who had barely acknowledged Bernard for years shook his hand with both of his own. The cafeteria became a place without rank. No managers, no dishwashers, no engineers, no cafeteria workers. Only people who had been afraid together and were now relieved together. The moon did not check badges. For one moment, neither did we. I returned to the urns. Even after the greatest achievement in human history, coffee needed to be poured. Duty does not disappear when history arrives. Sometimes duty is how history is held. People approached the counter. Every face carried a different version of the same joy. Bob's smile was wet. Dr. Sullivan's smile was crooked from the pain in his knee. Maria smiled like someone whose prayer had been accepted. Bernard smiled shyly, the smile of a man caught caring. I filled cup after cup. On the house, Maria announced. Everything is already paid for, I reminded her. Then more on the house than usual. Someone increased the television volume. Walter Cronkite had removed his glasses. The steadiest voice in America was breaking. For years, he had reported death. Kennedy, King Robert Kennedy, Vietnam. That afternoon, he reported a birth. The moment humanity became a species that had stood somewhere other than Earth. Cronkite rubbed his eyes. He smiled. The room quieted slightly to hear him. Together. That was the word beneath everything. Not I, not he. Not they, we, the astronauts, the engineers, the mathematicians, the women who typed the reports, the technicians who tested the equipment, the janitors who kept the rooms clean, the workers who served the food, the drivers who carried everyone there before sunrise, the families who waited at home, the people who questioned the mission, the people who believed in it, the boy who had removed his apron and walked toward mission control. A man approached the counter. I did not know him. White shirt, skinny tie, a badge with letters too small for me to read. His eyes were red. He had been crying openly. "Coffee, please," he said. I filled a cup. He took it but did not leave. He looked at me. "We did it." Not they did it. Not the astronauts did it. We. The man with the badge said we to the woman holding the coffee pot. The word crossed the counter. It entered the place where I had stood for 7 years, and the including was the landing, not the spacecraft touching the surface, not the dust. Not the flag that would be planted later, the word, the recognition that the impossible had required more people than history could name. "We did it," he repeated. I smiled. "Yes," I said, "we did." He lifted the cup. Then the cafeteria doors opened. Tommy stood there. His face was wet with sweat. His cafeteria badge remained clipped to his shirt. His engineering textbook was still in his pocket, but the apron was gone. He had found a place near mission control. I could see it in his eyes. He had stood close enough to hear the room erupt without a television between them. He had seen men at the consoles rise. He had seen history from the other side of the counter. Tommy walked toward me. For a moment, he could not speak. Then he placed both hands on the counter. "Mrs. Wilson." "Yes, I am going to work in that room." Not I want to. Not perhaps I am going to. The landing had changed his grammar. Hope speaks in questions. Decision speaks in declarations. "I know," I told him. He looked toward the table where the engineer who had dismissed him was now crying with his arms around another man. Tommy did not look angry. He looked certain. On the television, reporters repeated the words, "The Eagle has landed." But the landing had not ended. It was moving outward. Through mission control, through the cafeteria, into Tommy. Into every person watching. The spacecraft had reached the moon. The idea had begun its journey home. I left the Space Center at 7 that evening. The number 26 waited beneath the long golden light of a Houston summer. The same bus that had carried me toward Clear Lake in darkness now carried the invisible workforce home. Cleaning women. Maintenance men, security guards, kitchen workers, groundskeepers, people whose names would never appear beneath photographs of Apollo 11. The bus was full, and the bus was talking. Normally, the evening ride was quiet. People closed their eyes, shoes hurt, backs hurt. Hands smelled of disinfectant, grease, onions, paper, or machinery. A workday leaves its signature on the body. But that evening, every seat contained a story. I was near the hallway. I heard the cheering before the television said anything. Mr. Kraft ran past me and nearly knocked over a cart. One of the engineers hugged a trash can. No, he hugged the janitor standing beside the trash can. The stories traveled from seat to seat, hand to hand, warmth to warmth, like coffee. A woman across the aisle looked at my uniform. Were you there? I was there. What was it like? I considered the question. How do you explain a room releasing 7 years of fear? How do you describe grown men crying without making their tears sound small? How do you explain a word crossing a cafeteria counter and turning a worker into part of a mission? It was like church, I said. She nodded. But everybody was happy. She laughed. The laugh of a woman who attended church every Sunday and knew precisely what I meant. The number 26 entered 3rd Ward. The streets were not quiet. The neighborhood was outside, on porches, on stoops, on sidewalks, beside open windows where radios carried the broadcast. The same people who had questioned the money were celebrating the landing. The contradictions stood beside each other without apology. The schools still needed books. The roofs still leaked. Vietnam had not ended. Young men from the neighborhood were still being carried across one ocean, while Armstrong and Aldrin stood beyond every ocean on Earth. Poverty had not been defeated by a spacecraft. The pothole outside Mr. Johnson's barbershop had not repaired itself, but human beings were on the moon. Both things were true. A country could accomplish something magnificent and remain guilty of terrible neglect. Pride did not erase injustice. Injustice did not make the achievement unreal. Mr. Johnson stood outside the barber shop holding a transistor radio. He nodded slowly as the announcer described the landing. Mr. Johnson disliked showing surprise. That evening, pride had surprised him. Mrs. Robinson leaned over her gate. "Dorothy," I stopped. "Your boy has been in front of our television all day. 6 hours." I could not make him eat. The moon will do that. The moon does not excuse missing lunch. Tell that to the astronauts. Children ran through the street. They pointed upward. The moon was already visible, pale above the rooftops. The same moon, but not the same. Before that day, it had been an object. Now it was a place where people were standing. The children were not pointing at something. They were pointing somewhere. That difference mattered. A little boy named Samuel ran toward me. "Miss Dorothy, did you see the rocket?" "I saw the landing." "Did you see the men?" "Not yet." "Are they really up there?" "Yes." He looked at the moon. "Can they see us?" "I doubt it." "Can God see them?" "You will have to ask Reverend Thomas." Samuel considered that. Then he asked the question adults had spent years teaching him to ask. "Can black people go?" There it was, the question beneath the question. Not can human beings reach the moon. Can people like me enter the rooms where reaching is decided? I looked at Samuel. "Not yet," I said. His face fell. But not yet is not the same as no. He looked upward again. I continued down Dowling Street, past the church, past the barber shop, past the corner store where tomorrow's Houston Chronicle would arrive with a headline about the moon. The headline would not mention the coffee. That was fine. The coffee knew what it had done. I entered our house. Calvin sat in the living room. The television displayed the same gray images. He was 17, tall, his father's face, his father's quiet. The Wilson men did not speak easily about emotion. Their feelings appeared in their eyes and in the way they held their hands. Calvin's eyes were shining. "Mom, baby, I watched everything. I know. Mrs. Robinson kept trying to make me eat. I know that too. She does not understand. She understands food." He almost smiled, then his expression changed. "Mom, yes, I want to work there." The room became still. "I want to work at the Space Center." The words entered quietly, but I felt the future shift around them. Not in the cafeteria, not behind the counter. There, with the engineers, the mathematicians, the people who built machines and calculated paths. Calvin had never said it before. He loved science. He repaired radios. He dismantled clocks and usually managed to rebuild them with only 1 or 2 pieces left over. But wanting something privately and declaring it aloud are different acts. A dream remains safe while unspoken. Once spoken, it can fail. I sat beside him, took his hand. Then you will. He looked at me. You think I can? For 7 years, I had made coffee for some of the people in the country. I knew what intelligence looked like. It did not always look impressive. Sometimes it forgot where it left its glasses. Sometimes it spilled sugar across the counter. Sometimes it explained orbital mechanics with a dinner roll. Intelligence did not belong to white shirts. It did not belong to badges. It did not belong to one neighborhood. Calvin James Wilson, I said. I know those men. He waited. I know how they speak. I know how they think. I know how they make mistakes. You are as smart as any of them. He lowered his eyes. You are smarter than some. That brought the beginning of a smile. The difference between you and them is not the mind God placed in your head. What is it? They had someone who told them the room belonged to them. He looked toward the television. Armstrong's photograph appeared on the screen. So I am telling you, I continued. The room can belong to you too. He squeezed my hand. You can, I said. The moon landing had given the world a new place. It gave my son permission. Diane entered from the kitchen. Your dinner is getting cold. She was 14, practical. While the world watched the moon, Diane had made rice, beans, and cornbread. Thank you, baby. Did you see it at work? I saw it. Was everyone screaming? Eventually. Did you scream? I was working. Did you cry? I made coffee. I did not have time to cry. She rolled her eyes, the eye roll of a daughter who knew her mother was deflecting but accepted the deflection as part of the arrangement. We sat at the table. Rice, beans, cornbread, the ordinary dinner of a family eating what it could afford. The country had landed men on another world, but plates still needed filling. Children still needed feeding. The extraordinary always stands on ordinary things. Meals, buses, clean floors, typed pages. People arriving on time. James came home at 8. He smelled like mail. Paper, ink, dust, the carrying of thousands of other people's words. He kissed me in the kitchen. How was your day? I made coffee. Was it good coffee? The best I ever made. He smiled, the quiet Wilson smile. Then it was a good day. It was. Not because all problems had disappeared. They had not. Third Ward still needed books. The country remained divided. Men were still dying in Vietnam, but something had opened. A door, a possibility. That night after James and the children went to bed, I returned to the kitchen. The moon remained above the rooftops. Armstrong and Aldrin were still on the surface. For the first time in history, human beings looked at Earth from another world. I wondered whether they could see Houston. They could not. I knew that. Earth would appear as a blue and white sphere. No borders, no neighborhoods, no separate doors, no third ward, no space center. Only home. I thought about the man who had said we. I thought about Tommy declaring he would work inside mission control. I thought about Calvin on the couch. One spacecraft had landed. 3 different futures had begun moving. I washed my cup and prepared for bed. My alarm was set for 4:30. The astronauts were still on the moon. The engineers would need coffee in the morning. History does not remove the need for breakfast. The morning after the landing, Bob arrived at 6:52, 8 minutes later than usual. Black coffee, no sugar, no cream. His eyes were dry. His hands were steady. I filled his cup. He did not take it immediately. Dorothy? Yes. I owe you 7 years of thank yous. You owe me nothing. I mean it. So do I, he waited. You owe the coffee, Bob laughed. The sound was lighter than any laugh I had heard from him. He lifted the cup. Then thank you, coffee. He returned to his table. The building was different, not quieter. Apollo 11 had not yet returned safely. The mission remained dangerous. The astronauts still had to leave the moon. The upper stage of the lunar module had to ignite. They had to reconnect with Michael Collins. They had to leave lunar orbit, travel back to Earth, enter the atmosphere at the correct angle, survive the heat, and land in the ocean. A successful landing on the moon did not guarantee a return. Engineers did not celebrate early. But the impossible had become smaller. The moon had been reached. Everything afterward felt like a road home. Tommy returned wearing his apron. He tied it carefully, placed the engineering textbook beneath the counter. Then he looked at the urns. Mrs. Wilson, yes, 2 scoops or 1.5. 2, always, always, he smiled, but something had changed. Before the landing, Tommy watched engineers as though they belonged to another species. Afterward, he watched them as future colleagues. That is what permission does. It does not give you the destination. It changes the direction in which you walk. The engineer who had dismissed Tommy the previous day entered the cafeteria. He approached the counter. "Coffee," he said. I poured. Then he noticed Tommy. "You were near mission control yesterday, weren't you?" "Yes, sir." "How did you get in?" "I have an employee badge." The engineer looked at the word cafeteria printed beneath Tommy's name. Then he saw the engineering textbook. "What are you studying?" "Mathematics. Physics when I can." The engineer paused. "The diagram yesterday." "Yes, sir." "You were right. It was part of the descent radar documentation." Tommy did not answer. The engineer looked uncomfortable. "I should not have assumed you would not understand it." "No, sir." "That was an apology." "Yes, sir. You are supposed to say something." Tommy considered it. "Would you explain the diagram?" The engineer stared at him, then he laughed. "Come by the technical library after your shift." Tommy looked at me. I kept my eyes on the urn. Some doors open loudly. Others open because someone finally realizes he has been standing in the way. Tommy enrolled in night school. He worked mornings in the cafeteria and attended classes in the evening. Some nights he slept only 4 hours. I recognized the look. Engineers and students share the same exhaustion when pursuing something that refuses to become easy. The engineer from the radar team began leaving old technical manuals for him. Not answers, manuals. That was better. An answer solves one problem. A manual teaches you how many problems remain. Tommy failed calculus once. He arrived at work the next morning, placed his book beneath the counter, and said he was finished. "With calculus?" I asked. "With all of it?" "Why? I am not smart enough." I pointed toward the cafeteria. Bob had just dropped a spoon. Dr. Sullivan was searching 3 pockets for glasses resting on his head. An engineer near the window had poured salt into his coffee instead of sugar. "You see those men?" "Yes. They make mistakes before breakfast. This is different." "No, this is your first difficult calculation. Their difficult calculations are simply more expensive." He looked down. "You failed 1 class." "I studied." "Then study differently." "What if I fail again?" "Then fail more intelligently." He laughed despite himself. "Mrs. Wilson, that does not make sense." "It will after coffee." Tommy repeated the class. He passed, then another, then another. The road was not straight. He left school once when his mother became ill, returned after she recovered, worked double shifts, borrowed textbooks, studied equations beside the loading dock during lunch. Years later, he earned an engineering degree. The first morning he entered the center as an engineer, he wore a white shirt and a narrow tie. He approached my counter. I pretended not to recognize him. "Coffee?" I asked. "Please." 1.5 scoops or 2, he grinned. 2, always 2. His badge no longer said cafeteria. It said engineer. He worked on systems I could not explain, but he still came to the cafeteria. The boy had left the kitchen and entered the cathedral. He never forgot where the kitchen was. Calvin followed a different road. He graduated from high school, applied to college, received rejection letters. The first arrived in a thin envelope. Hope usually arrives in thick envelopes. Disappointment arrives in 1 page. He placed it on the kitchen table. James read it, said nothing. Diane read it, called the college fools. Calvin went to his room. I let him remain there for an hour, then I knocked. "Come in." He sat on the bed. The rejection letter lay beside him. "Maybe I was wrong," he said. "About what?" "Working at the center." "One college said no. Maybe they know." "Know what?" "That I cannot do it." I sat beside him. "Do you remember the lunar module?" "Yes." "Did it land at the first place they planned?" "No." "Why?" "Rocks." "What did Armstrong do?" "He kept flying." "Until he found a place." I picked up the letter. "This is a rock." Calvin looked at me. "Fly farther." He applied elsewhere. He was accepted. College was harder than he admitted. He was one of few black students in several classes. Some classmates assumed he had been admitted through charity. One professor suggested he consider a less demanding course. Calvin called home that night. I listened. Then I asked whether the professor had ever worked at the Space Center. No. Then he does not know what an engineer looks like. You do. I served enough of them. He remained, studied, failed, recovered, graduated. On his first day at the manned Spacecraft Center, he entered through the front door. Not the service entrance, not the cafeteria entrance, the front door. He wore a badge with the word engineer beneath his name. I watched him enter from across the lobby. He did not know I was there. He walked differently than he had as a boy, not because he had stopped being afraid. Courage does not remove fear. It teaches the body to move while fear follows. He passed the security desk. The guard looked at the badge, opened the gate. And my son entered the room the world had once told him did not belong to him. Calvin worked on Skylab. Later, he worked on the space shuttle. Every morning, he passed the cafeteria. Every morning, he stopped for coffee. Every morning, he complained. Mom, the coffee is not as good as yours. Good. You could teach them. Some knowledge must remain with the master. Diane became a science teacher. She returned to Third Ward. The schools had books then, not enough books, but books. There was a science laboratory, not a good laboratory, but a room with sinks, glass containers, and posters on the walls. One poster showed the moon, gray surface, black sky, Earth rising above the horizon. Children sat beneath that poster and learned about gravity. Some lived in houses where bills remained unpaid. Some shared bedrooms with brothers and sisters. Some had parents working 2 jobs. Diane told them the moon belonged to their questions, too. The neighborhood had not been wrong in 1969. It was still not wrong. A country should not have to choose between reaching upward and caring for the ground beneath its feet. It should do both. The lesson was not that the moon mattered more than the schools. It was that children in schools without books deserved to believe they could reach the moon. James continued delivering mail. For years, he asked the same question when he came home. How was your day? I made coffee. Was it good? The best. We grew older inside that conversation. The pay phone disappeared. The post office changed machines. The children moved out. Dowling Street changed names. Buildings rose, buildings fell. The moon remained. Louise retired. At her farewell breakfast, she cooked the eggs herself because she did not trust anyone else with the grill. Bernard continued washing dishes long after his back asked him to stop. Maria remained at the register until she could calculate change faster than the machine. Bob retired. Doctor. Sullivan's bad knee became 2 bad knees. The engineers changed. The missions changed. Apollo became Skylab. Skylab became Shuttle. Computers that once filled rooms became small enough to sit on desks. The coffee urns remained large. Some technologies cannot be improved. I remained behind the counter, still measuring, still pouring, still watching. People sometimes asked whether I regretted not being recognized. Recognized for what? I did my job. That answer disappointed them. People prefer resentment. It creates a clearer story. But my feelings were not simple enough. Of course, I understood the unfairness. History placed a spotlight on a few faces and allowed thousands of others to disappear into the dark. The official photographs showed astronauts and engineers. They did not show cleaning women boarding buses before sunrise. They did not show Bernard's hands in dishwater. They did not show Maria balancing the register. They did not show Louise holding a spatula while listening to a voice from the moon. They did not show James at the post office. They did not show Third Ward children pointing upward. They did not show the apron Tommy folded before walking toward mission control. They did not show my coffee, but I was there. That matters. Being remembered and having mattered are not the same thing. A foundation does not need to appear in the photograph for the building to stand. I am Dorothy Mae Wilson. I was a cafeteria worker. I made coffee. I poured it into cups and handed those cups to people who knew things I did not understand. They designed engines, calculated trajectories, built computers, guided astronauts. I could not do those things, but I could arrive before dawn. I could recognize fear in a shaking hand. I could give a boy permission to leave the kitchen. I could tell my son that the room belonged to him too. I could make the coffee, and the coffee was good. At 4:30 in the morning, I still sometimes wake before the alarm. I walk into the kitchen. The house is quieter now. The children are grown. James's postal uniform no longer hangs beside the door. I stand at the same window above the sink. Third Ward lies outside. Rooftops, trees, power lines, churches, and the moon. It looks ordinary again, but it is not. The moon has footprints. I cannot see them, but I know they are there. Those footprints were made possible by rockets, fuel, mathematics, guidance systems, heat shields, computers, thousands of calculations, and thousands of people. Some wore spacesuits, some wore headsets. Some wore white shirts and narrow ties, some wore aprons. Some carried folders, some carried dishes, some carried mail. Some carried children through difficult years. Some carried coffee. History likes a small cast, a few names, a few faces. A sentence that fits beneath a photograph. Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. That is true, but truth can be larger than a sentence. Behind that step stood thousands of other steps. The cleaning woman walking toward the bus stop before sunrise. The technician entering the laboratory at midnight. The secretary carrying corrected pages to a meeting. The dishwasher crossing the kitchen. The postal worker walking his route. The student entering a classroom where nobody expected him to succeed. The cafeteria boy leaving his apron on the counter. The mother walking into her kitchen at 4:30. I made the coffee that sent men to the moon. Not alone, never alone. Impossible things are not done alone. They are done by the visible and the invisible, by the people whose names appear in books, and by the people who make sure the lights are on when those names arrive. 768 cups a day, measured by hand. 2 scoops per gallon. With love, the rocket reached the moon, but the foundation made sure it could rise.